Welcome to the Mission First People Always podcast. We're glad you're here. And now our host, Dr. Mike Patterson.
It's Dr. Mike Patterson, your host of the Mission First People Always podcast, where we talk about what it takes to be a great leader and how to build a great team. My goal is to bring you cutting-edge ideas and resources that you can begin using right away in your leadership practice. Better results almost always begin and end with people. So communication, collaboration, and bringing out the best in others are always at the top of my list when it comes to skill development. If these are on the top of your organization's list of needs, please email me at mike@drmikepatterson.com for a free, no obligation consultation. I sincerely would love to help. And if you want to know more about my philosophy, my book, Mission First, People Always, the definitive guide to balancing people and performance, as well as the companion e-learning experience, delivers the 9 practices of a people-first leader that I think are so critical. So visit missionfirstpeoplealwaysbook.com to find out more. Over 100 years ago, Henry Ford was reputed to have said, "You can have a car painted in any color you want as long as it's black." It was the beginning of mass production and the assembly line, and one size fits all was necessary to make it all work. For many years, we treated employees pretty much the same way. We hired people for their hands and their ability to perform certain tasks with consistency. But that is rapidly changing in the knowledge era. We need people's intellect to help us solve complex problems, and we need them to collaborate with colleagues to get things done. We now understand that people's personalities and emotions have an enormous impact on how effective they are at work. This is where the emerging science of neuropsychology can help us understand how to bring out the best in those wonderfully unique people on our teams. And today I'm excited to have as my guest, Dr. Steve Swavely from the great state of North Carolina. Steve's purpose is to help executives and organizations improve their leadership capacity through the integration of neuroscience research within leadership development programs and services. Steve helps his clients improve decision-making processes, manage resistance to change, modify self-limiting beliefs and action, and increase collaboration. Steve holds a doctoral degree in clinical neuropsychology from Georgia State University and is an active writer on issues related to neuroscience and leadership. And we have all those links to Steve and his work in the show notes. And after meeting him, you're definitely going to want to follow Steve and keep up with what he's doing. So Steve, welcome to the Mission First People Always podcast.
Well, Mike, thank you for inviting me. This is quite a treat. Love talking neuropsychology, leadership, performance. All of these are topics dear to my heart. So thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. I've been looking forward to this conversation for some time because I want you to help me with something. It's an issue I have, and fortunately, I'm a big enough man to admit it. And maybe some of my listeners struggle in this way as well. I'm a little intimidated by the word neuropsychology. It sounds a bit scary to me. Why should we not be frightened of this big word? What exactly is neuropsychology? And just explain it at a layman's level for a guy that doesn't want to be intimidated any longer.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a question I get asked a lot, especially since I've made the shift, well over 20 years ago from the medical field to the business arena. I brought the whole science of neuropsychology with me. In a nutshell, neuropsychology is the blending of 2 sciences, the science of the brain and the science of the mind. I like to use the analogy of a computer. And if you think about the hardware of the computer, the silicon chips, the motherboard, the circuitry, the brain. And the mind is like the software, the programming that goes into the, and to understand what makes people tick, you got to have an understanding of both of those, the hardware and the software. And that's really what neuropsychology brings to the whole arena of business performance and leadership success.
So you're suggesting that our brains can be leveraged as a tool for greater leadership effectiveness, just like we've leveraged technology, the computer, to be an incredible tool for productivity. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, absolutely. And I'd take it a step further and say, we've done as a society a much better job of leveraging technology than we have of leveraging our own capacities as it relates to our cognitive and intellectual and emotional capabilities. And yeah, I think in some ways we are accelerating our technological advances while our people skills, our capacity to develop performance in organizations through our people is lagging. And I think neuropsychology brings a science that helps us correct that deficiency.
So going back to this idea of neuropsychology being a powerful tool that we can leverage, what does it offer that frontline leaders in organizations, or perhaps the small business owner who's hustling every day to make payroll? Is the tool something that's the tool neuropsychology? Is it something that's available to everyone, or do you need a PhD in this like you to make it work for us?
Well, I think that's one of the things that I have created as my mission, which is to bring that science to the level that the average business person, the average leader, the supervisor on the front line working to build a successful team can use this information and this knowledge to be more effective in their leadership. And I'll give you an example of where this might happen right on the front lines. One of the things that we know about being a great leader is you got to be a great listener. And everyone knows there's a great relationship or correlation between great leadership and great listening skills. But what most people don't realize is what's going on inside the brain when people feel listened to. And if you understand that concept, it helps you know when in my communication with people do I listen? When in my communication with people do I ask questions? And when do I give direction? And my experience is that many leaders have it exactly opposite. They're giving direction when they should be listening. And they're asking questions when they should be giving direction. And what neuropsychology has done is it's helped us create a template or a blueprint, if you will, for when to listen, when to ask questions, and when to give direction.
Steve, that's a great example. And I know that's happening out there right now with somebody who's listening to this. What is that template? What do you say to somebody who, when they're sitting across from one of their employees talking about a business issue, or maybe it's a coaching session, there's some sort of performance feedback going on, and that employee is sharing something, and we're in our heads thinking about, well, what are we going to say next? Coach that person on how to do better.
Yeah, let me begin to answer that question by first giving a little side insight, because I think just giving people a bag of tricks to use is maybe useful, but I find that people are much more likely to use those tricks if they understand the concept behind it. They understand the philosophy and the science.
Yeah, ground us in the science. That's a great place to start.
Yeah. Okay. So, think about, back in my day when I went to many years ago, when I went to graduate school, we talked about parts of the brain and, it was everything was focused on what does this part of the brain do versus what does that part of the brain do. Today, we've learned it's not so much about parts of the brain, but systems within the brain. And as it relates to being a great leader, there are two systems that are really important to understand. And one is the emotion system. That's the part that's deep inside our brain. It has names like the limbic system, the amygdala. That's not important. What's important to know is that we have this system that's an emotional system. And it's where emotions, both comfortable and uncomfortable emotions come from. We have a second system in our brain, which is the thinking system. And this is the part of us that makes us human. It's the part that allows us to be great at solving problems, abstract reason, and decision making, concept formation. And as a leader, if I begin to understand that I and my followers both have these two systems operate and learn how to leverage those systems, how to activate, if you will, a thinking system in myself and in my people, and how to energize the comfortable or positive emotions in myself and in my people, and how to reduce or manage the negative emotions or the uncomfortable emotions. That gives me a huge advantage over people that don't have that understanding.
So I appreciate that grounding, but how do we pull the levers?
Yeah. What,
Yeah.
okay. What's the practical value of, right?
Yeah. So we got two systems. We've got the emotional system. We got the thinking system. We want to bring out the best in people. So knowing we've got these two systems to work with, how does that work in terms of, let's go back to our scenario here. An employee has come to me with an issue she's struggling with. Um, I'm the manager. I'm trying to hear her out. I'm trying to give some good feedback. I'm trying to offer some direction. I'm trying to ask some good questions. How do we know when to do what?
Yeah. Yep. The practical application really boils down to where we started this conversation, which was around when do you listen? When do you ask questions? When do you give direction? And the simple blueprint is understanding those two systems is when a person is experiencing some negative emotion, whether it be anger, frustration, anxiety, the part of their brain that is that emotional system. One of the things that we know about how the brain operates is that when people feel listened to, literally bombs the emotional center of the brain. And when I say that when people feel listened to, what I mean by that is that a person is interacting with someone that is acknowledging their point of view and recognizing their perceptions and is understanding where that person's thoughts and beliefs and emotions are in that moment. It's a concept that's called active listening. And so what many leaders do, Mike, when they have someone that comes into their office that's frustrated or upset or anxious, they go right into they go right into get a room. And the proper machinery in that person's brain has not been engaged yet. You can't think very effectively with that emotional system. So the first thing you have to do is you have to calm the emotional system by doing some active listening.
Okay. So now I'm tracking with you. Someone comes in, their emotional system is engaged. The proper response is to listen actively and validate some of those emotions they're feeling. And maybe that's why, and I don't want to take us too far off track here, but I've been reading more about this idea of gaslighting, where someone invalidates another person's emotions what they're feeling in order to try to convince them that they're all wrong or misguided or crazy, to use a very non-clinical application of that term. That can be devastating, I would think, for a performance related issue. Am I right about that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Um, that, that type of response, just activates more of a, uh, problem finding machinery of the brain. And one of the things that we know about the brain is that there's 5 times more neuromachinery dedicated to finding problems in the world and in our own space than for finding opportunities. And something like gaslighting just serves to activate those systems within the brain even further.
So if you've told us the right thing to do, someone comes in, their emotional system's engaged, we as leaders ought to actively listen. Why don't we naturally do that? Why do we not want to do that? Or at least some of us, maybe I'm speaking to myself here. We want to jump in and solve somebody's problem. We want to give them direction. We want to point them toward the solution that immediately came to us and point them toward the door so we can get on with our day. Why do we do that?
Well, I think your last statement there, there's a clue there, and it's so we can get on with our day. A lot of times leaders think they don't have the time to have a conversation with their people. And in reality, what happens then is that you shout out some direction and you walk away, and that person has not really heard or understood what or why you have given that direction. And the value of that listening that we talked about was to put the brain in neutral and neutralize the negative emotion. And once that's done, then we can go into step 2, which is to begin asking what I call solution focused questions, which literally begin to activate the thinking part of that brain, the thinking system that we talked about. You know, Mike, one of the things I like to talk about is that the thinking part of the brain it's small and it tires quickly. And we don't like to use it. As a rule, humans work to conserve that part of their brain by not thinking. They like to do things on autopilot all the time. And our purpose as a leader is to help get people thinking. And one of the things that questions do, solution focused, open-ended questions, is they begin to activate that part of the brain, the thinking system, to get people to a problem solving mode and out of a problem identification.
So Steve, what's an example of a good solution focused question? Is there a particular format? We mentioned this word template earlier. Is there a right way to ask that sort of question?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple things to think about. Number one, you want it to be open-ended. A question that can be answered with a simple yes or no does not activate the thinking system. So you want it to be something where the person has to think. They have to actually engage the thinking system to the audience. So number one, it has to be open-ended. Number two, you want it to be solution focused. What I mean is you want the question to guide the listener down a path of identifying a solution to the challenge that is causing the frustration or the anxiety. So a simple example would be, so Mike, what ideas do you have to solve this dilemma? Notice that's a very different question than, Mike, how did you get yourself into this dilemma?
Right.
The second question just activates the emotional system, raises defensiveness, and gets the person into a place where they're not able to think clearly and they're emotional. and they're defensive.
So these open-ended questions, what is? And so let me play the difficult situation kind of person here who says, Steve, I don't know what to do. That's why I'm coming to you with this. You're the boss. You should know, give me some direction here. Just can you fix this for me? How do we as leaders respond to that person?
I love that. I love that question, Mike, because it's something that I hear all the time from folks that I'm coaching. Is that's the fear that's response they're going to get when they ask that question. And sometimes you do get that. But here's what I found is that when you first ask the question, Mike, what ideas do you have to solve this dilemma? Frequently here is something very similar to what you just said. Well, I don't know. I haven't thought about it. Well, of course they haven't thought about it because they've been operating with the emotional system. And so the trigger of asking that solution-focused, open-ended question is just the start to get the thinking system of the brain engaged and get it cranked up. And one of the things I coach my executives to do is to follow that question of, well, I don't know, what ideas do you have with this? Well, if you didn't know, what would that solution be? Now, that's kind of a silly question. But what I find is that using that as a prompt to get people to really dig and think a little bit deeper gives them the opportunity to pull some things out of their thought processes that either they're reluctant to talk about or that they haven't quite fully formed a full idea around, but gets the dialogue going and gets the person engaged in a thinking mode.
But once the dialogue is going, is there a point when the leader can rightfully step in and suggest some alternative views, gently prod that person toward maybe a solution the leader believes is the right way to go? And then what if somebody really brings ideas that are inconsistent with business strategy, established processes, things that would get us in trouble, and the manager, the leader knows that will get us in trouble if we go that way? How does the manager have an active role in redirecting once the thinking mechanism is in play?
Yeah, Pat, that's a great question. And let's just retrace where we've been to this point. We've used active listening to calm the person, kind of put their brain in neutral. We've used solution-focused, open-ended questions to activate the thinking part of the brain and to engage them in a dialogue and solutions. And at that point, as the leader, one of two outcomes is likely to occur. One is the chance that your follower, person that you're having the dialogue with, actually has a really great idea for solving the problem. And it's at that point when that idea is identified that the leader can then go into the directed mode and say, Mike, that sounds like an awesome possibility. Here's what I'd like you to do. Go try it. Come back next Tuesday. Let's talk about how well it worked out.
Yep.
That's one possibility. The other possibility is that, well, Mike comes up with several solutions, but none of them are aligned with the strategies of the organization, or maybe they're things that as a leader, having a lot of experience in this area, will work. And at that point, what the leader has to do is redirect the conversation. Say, Mike, those are all some really good ideas. But in my experience, let me tell you what I have found might be a better solution. And then give you what I believe would be the best course of action. Now, notice the difference between that sequence of steps, listen, I understand your perspective. You know that I understand your perspective. You and I dialogue about some possible solutions together. And we then close with, well, you know what? Those solutions probably won't work. Here's a solution that I think will work, Mike. We're much more likely to be willing to take that solution and run with it, since you know that we've had the opportunity to dialogue about solutions and that I understand your perspective.
Steve, I love the way you laid it out so clearly for us. I think that's really it's useful to me and it's useful to our listeners, I'm sure. How long, and this may be another reflection of me and how I tend to operate, but how long should all of this take? I mean, leaders are busy. I haven't spoken to any leader in the last year or two who said, "Yeah, I've got tons of extra time on my hands. I want people to come in and hang out with me and just consume hours of my day as we talk through things." People, people are busy. They've got things piling up. How long does this kind of conversation, should it last? And maybe do we need to find the time, because the consequences of not having these conversations are so great that we're going to end up spending more time if we don't do it right? Speak to us about
Yeah,
that.
yeah, absolutely. Here as a general rule of thumb, what I coach my clients is that on these random chance encounters in the hallway where someone comes up to you with a situation and they want to discuss it, 3 minutes is about what you should spend doing that whole sequence of active listening. Let me understand your perspective. Let me know. Let you know I know your perspective. Let me ask you for some potential solutions to see what thoughts you have about it. By the way, if you come up with one that's a good one, and I say go run with it, your motivation to make it work is just increased all the more. And the final piece of giving that person clear direction of next steps to take, no more than 3 minutes. In those situations where it's going to take more than three, or you find that the person is struggling, or there are some other issues that come up in the conversation, it's usually best to then take a pause and say, you know what, this is a really important issue. We need to give it some thought. Let's you and I set up some time, you know, this afternoon, tomorrow morning, we'll down through and give it the attention that it apparently deserves.
Boy, you eased my mind, Steve, with that 3 minutes, that 3 minute direction there, because I think we can all find 3 minutes for folks on our teams who need us. And I think deferring the longer conversations makes perfect sense. Let's shift gears here a little bit and talk about some specific applications of neuropsychology. So, by the way, I am less frightened of this word now that I know what it's all about. So, you've helped me greatly already, Steve. But let's talk about some specific applications. How can neuropsychology help us, or what does it tell us about employee engagement? Again, I'm with a lot of organizations in the work I do, and I often hear from my clients that we just did an employee engagement survey. We got the results back and we're not so pleased with what we see, or we're working on this area as a result of something we learned about employee engagement. How can neuropsychology help those folks?
Yeah, that's an area that is near and dear to my heart. I've done a lot of work in the area of engagement and applying neuropsychology to it. And again, let me lay a little of at the risk of people's eyes glazing over, let me lay a little groundwork for the science behind it. And I promise to make it interesting. And then we'll talk about, okay, what is the actual application? There are, we talk systems of the brain. There are within the brain something that's been identified as motivational brain networks. Well, it's a big awkward word that just means what motivates. And we've discovered that in the workplace, there are 6 or 7 very important drivers of engagement. Some of them are more people oriented. And these include being socially accepted, being appreciated, equity and fairness in the workplace. And some of them are more performance oriented, like clarity about what does success look like in this job that I'm doing? And do I have the autonomy to actually do the things that I think are necessary to achieve that success? And do I have the skills? Do I have the competencies needed to create that success? And as a leader, if we understand those 6 different drivers of engagement, we can build an environment where that environment supports each of those drivers in a way that builds engagement.
Steve, it makes me think about an assessment that you and I are familiar with that helps identify those core motives that drive people. You use 2 words that we used often with the SCI 2.0 in the core strengths training. I know you're familiar with, as am I, people performance. We add process and perspective as well. So what role does a tool like the SDI, how can that help us figure out those drivers that help us get people engaged?
Well, yeah, that tool is something that is really critical in understanding where are the potential blind spots in my environment, in the environment that I'm creating as a leader, and where are possible. Well, let me phrase it this way: we have 2 different types of blind spots. One is skill or a capability that we're underusing, and another is a skill or capability that we're overusing. And I find that the SDI is a great tool to help us begin to identify where those potential blind spots are and how to begin to balance them out so that we are indeed giving an adequate and appropriate amount of attention to both the people side of the organization and team, plus the performance side.
Communication. It often comes down to how well we can, as leaders, how well we can relate to the folks on our teams, our colleagues, how well we can communicate what our teams are doing toward achieving performance objectives to senior executives who are determining how to allocate resources and whether certain people should be elevated to the organization or not. How does neuropsychology help us communicate better communicate up to senior executives, communicate to our direct report, folks on our team, even clients? How does neuropsychology inform communication?
Well, it goes back or concepts of listening and asking, telling. I have a little story here that, if you'll indulge me for. When I was growing up as a kid, my dad was an aeronautical engineer, and he wanted me to be an engineer so bad. He was so passionate about the field. He wanted me to be an engineer, but I just didn't get the math thing. You're sitting down at the dining table with my dad, and he is, quote, helping me with my math homework. And I remember one time he got so frustrated with me, banged his fist on the table. He said, "Son, don't you get it? There's only 3 things you got to know how to do in math. You got to know how, or it's 4 things you got to know how to do. You got to know how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. That's it. If you know how to do those 4 things, you can be a master mathematician." Well, of course, the problem is you got to know when to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. And that's what I was struggling with. Communication is exactly the same way, except there's just 3 things really that we can do. At the core, all of our communication is either some form of listening, some form of asking questions, or some form of giving guidance, direction, or feedback. And again, the key is to know when to do what. And I like to talk about communication as a dance of reading the other person and watching their behavior. And if you see negative emotion begin to rise, you go into listening mode. Once you see their emotion begin to drop as a result of that, you can now go into the questioning mode, and you can begin to have a dialogue with them around solving the issue or communicating the vision or whatever leadership function that you're trying to accomplish with that person in that moment. And then it's at the very end of that conversation that you go into kind of the telling mode. Here's the next step. And what I find is that most leaders have that sequence exactly backwards. They start with telling people what to do and only ask questions when there's a problem, which typically just creates more defensiveness from their followers.
Steve, as you describe the three key aspects of communication, listening, asking, and giving direction, I immediately thought of all those years I spent in sales and sales management, where our salespeople oftentimes seem to get that equation, knowing when to do when wrong. So it would seem like neuropsychology would be of great service to professional salespeople as well. Do you agree?
Absolutely. I've worked with a lot of salespeople, and one of the things that I find is that the novice salesperson is actually pretty good at doing a really great job of the selling process, because they go in and what do you think they do? They do a lot of listening, right? But the more expertise they develop in their product and in their service and in the thing that they're selling, there's a natural shift for them to want to go into a telling mode. And so instead of going in and listening to their clients or their prospects about what their needs are, they go in and try to tell them what their needs are. And of course, that's not a great way to bring on new clients.
And I was in the pharmaceutical industry for 20 years, and sometimes we had such a very small window of time with a physician or some other decision maker in the patient care process that you had just a minute or 2 minutes or 3, if you're lucky, to address all 3 of those components. And the best, most effective salespeople mastered it. They had that their questions, their declarative statements, and their listening down. But those who weren't as successful wasted a lot of time on one of the 3 components that maybe wasn't right at the moment. So this is right on target for salespeople.
Yeah, I would add that the good salesperson goes in prepared. They've done the research on the organization, and if you're selling pharmaceuticals, what that physician's issues are in the field that they're in, and so you can go in and jumpstart the act of listening by sharing what you know about their challenges. And when they hear something that resonates with them as, yeah, that's my challenge. Now you've captured their attention.
Right.
And you've got their long enough that you can then also offer the solution.
Yeah. I love the science-based application on these scenarios. 25 years ago, 30 years ago, we just called it being a good salesperson. But now with how we've grounded it in science and we're understanding why you were or were not a good salesperson in many cases. Okay.
Mike, you hit on something really important that I want to tackle here. And that is, so much of what neuropsychology has done for the field of, of helping in the people area, whether it be leadership or sales, is it's validated what we know has worked for many, many years.
Yep.
But 200 years ago, a little over 200 years ago, the microscope opened up the world for biology. And today, these new neuroimaging techniques and technology that we have has opened up the door for neuroscience to do the same thing. And I think we're seeing the fruits of that beginning to come into the businesses that you and I are in, which is the people business.
Right. All right, Steve, I'm going to give you one more opportunity to give us a specific example for how neuropsychology can help the leader. And here it is. It's the leader dealing with someone who needs to improve their performance. You're sitting across from someone who's not quite cutting it. You need to put them on a performance improvement plan. How can neuropsychology help that leader in that critical moment?
Yeah. The short answer is assertive feedback and direction. And so many leaders find that a challenge for one of two reasons. One is many leaders think that being assertive is being aggressive or abrasive. And some leaders don't understand that their assertiveness is perceived as abrasiveness by other people. The solution to that dilemma, how you manage that as a leader, is to really understand the person sitting on the other side of the table from you. Are they someone that really likes to be told how they're doing and straight talk about, here's what your performance is giving us, here's where your performance needs to be, and you've got to close that gap? Or are they someone that needs to be a little more guided to that discovery, and that you have to be a little less directive with them and guide them to help them discover for themselves where the gap is and how to close it?
Steve, my listeners have come to expect some really practical, what they can start doing this afternoon or tomorrow morning as a result of the conversations I have with my guests. So could you give our listeners an action item, something that they can begin practicing as a result of something we've talked about today?
If I was going to pick one thing that a leader could do that would improve their leadership capacity virtually overnight, it's to make efforts to connect with each and every one of the people on their team. And that connection is a simple conversation with people about what's going on in their life, understanding what is happening with them and their family and the challenges that they face. And there's a little strategy that I like to have people do that I work with. I call it rounds. And basically it's where you connect with each of your people once a day, once a week, whatever the opportunity that you have to meet with your people are. And you ask them a couple questions. First question is, Mike, what's going well for you today? What's working? And you have a dialogue about that. That engages the person in a conversation that feels good to them, and they walk away from that conversation in a better place than they may have been to be. The second question is, what can I help you? What do you need some assistance with? And that helps the other person know, hey, Mike's, or Steve's got my back. Steve's going to do what he needs to do to help me be successful. And then the third question is, Mike, who should I recognize? And what this does, lets that I'm trying to find other people to recognize. And when you have an entire team that's getting those types of questions on a regular basis, what's working? How can I help you? Who should I recognize? You're going to build connections with the team. They're going to pay results for you time and time again in the future.
Yeah, I absolutely love those three questions. I especially like the third question. It's one that I don't hear often. And I think it's really valuable because it invites the person being asked that question to look around them, to consider the contributions of their colleagues, to affirm something that someone else has done or is doing. I think that builds stronger teams. It makes people recognize and appreciate the folks around them, maybe in ways that we can easily overlook unless we pause. And as you have taught us today, to engage our brains to think about things that we tend to, rush over and go on autopilot and don't think about. And appreciating the contributions of our colleagues might be one of those things we need to think about more often.
Absolutely. I mean, go back to our conversation about the motivational brain networks, right? I mean, what do people want? They want acceptance. They want appreciation. They want clarity. And those types of questions create an environment where all of those are in good supply.
Indeed. Well, Steve, time flies when you're having a great conversation. And I thought this was a great conversation. I have learned a great deal today, and I'm going to take away those three questions you gave us. And I'm going to try to find a place to use those in the next 24, 36 hours in my work. How can listeners continue to follow you and your writing, what you're up to, maybe get in touch with you if they want coaching or want to learn more about how neuroscience or neuropsychology in this world of neuroscience affects leaders and leadership? How can they get in touch with you?
Yeah. Well, I'm active on LinkedIn. So just look me up on LinkedIn, connect with me there. I've got a blog, the Neuropsychology of Leadership, that is there for the taking. And I regularly publish articles about how neuropsychology can improve leadership effectiveness. And I also have a website, evolutionleadershipcoaching.com, and people can connect with me there as well.
Awesome. Thank you for being a great guest, Steve. Appreciate you doing this. And to my listeners, thank you for being part of this Mission First People Always podcast. We have these conversations for you. It's about you. We're trying to help you be a great leader and build a great team. And so I hope today's conversation move the needle in that respect for you. So please join us next time for another interesting conversation about the things that can help you. If you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, please do so. In the meantime, check out my book, Mission First People Always, The Definitive Guide to Balancing People and Performance. It is the best $6 or $7 you're ever going to spend, unless, of course, you buy a winning lottery ticket at some point. But we know that's not likely to happen. So go with the sure bet and buy the book. All right, folks, that's it. Subscribe. See you next week. Let's have another great conversation. Steve, thanks. Until next time, God bless everyone.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to create a stronger, more people-centric and empowered culture for your organization, visit drmikepatterson.com.